Good morning, everyone. My name is Patty Hubbard, and I am the Outdoor Recreation Grant Planner at Missouri State Parks. And this is the 2025 Grant Application General Information Workshop for the Land and Water Conservation Fund Program. What is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, or LWCF for short? The LWCF is a grant program that started in 1965 with the passage of the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act. The fund is supported by revenue that is generated by offshore oil and gas drilling leases. The purpose of the act is to assist in preserving, developing, and ensuring that all citizens of the U.S., including both present and future generations, have access to outdoor recreation. The Act provides funding for federal land acquisition and development, as well as providing financial assistance to states in planning, acquiring and developing land and water areas and facilities to be used for outdoor recreation. This program is considered a pass-through grant. The National Park Service is the federal agency who manages the program. The funding is passed through to each state. Here in Missouri, it is granted to the Department of Natural Resources. At DNR, we subgrant at least a portion of the funding through a competitive grant program. The amount of money that is available to grant each year depends on how much is appropriated by Congress and then allocated by the National Park Service. So the nice thing about the LWCF program is that it supports both big recreational areas like the national parks and small outdoor recreational areas such as city parks and schools. This map, being small, makes it very hard to read, I know, but this shows all projects through 2022 that we have awarded here in the state of Missouri. As you can see, the number and distribution of projects throughout the states and much of the program have benefited both rural and urban areas. In the 59 years of the LWCF program has been around, we have funded over $104 million worth of projects across the state. Every single county in Missouri has at least one LWCF project, and currently we have over 170 projects throughout the state. So, who can apply for the Land and Water Conservation Fund grant? States and local governments, which means city and county municipalities, public school districts, and public universities are welcome to apply. The LWCF program can only fund public entities. So non-for-profits such as 501(c)s and for-profit entities are not eligible sponsors for the LWCF grant. How does this funding work? This is a 50-50 matching grant program, which means of the total project cost, the federal government will pay for 50% and your local match must be at least 50%. In other words, for every dollar spent on the project, 50 cents can be reimbursed by the grant if the costs are eligible, and then you as the project sponsor are responsible for the remaining cost. The matching share portion, or your portion of the project, can be a combination of cash, in-kind labor, or equipment use, or donations from third-party donors. In order to be used as match, it must meet the same requirements as the grant request does. This is a reimbursable grant program, which means you have to spend money up front in order to request a reimbursement. The maximum amount that can be requested per sponsor is $500,000 per project. The minimum amount that can be requested is $25,000, meaning the minimum total project cost is $50,000. If at this time, we are not sure how much the Missouri 25 apportionment will be, but we are anticipating that it'll be the same as our 24, which was approximately $5.3 million. So what projects are eligible? In the open project selection process, or the OPSP for short, in Appendix B is the grant application guide. And on page 2 through 4 of that guide, or Adobe 25 to 27 if you're looking at it digitally, there's a fairly comprehensive list of the types of eligible projects. They can be categorized in a few ways. First is the acquisition of either land or water for public outdoor recreation. This includes acquiring new parkland for development as a standalone park or new acreage that is adjacent to an existing park that you are expanding. It can also be used to complete multiple purpose projects where one component of the project is outdoor recreation and the other component is not. A good example is a water reservoir. So part of that is for recreation and part of it might be for your city's water. But grant funding can only be used on the part of the project that is considered the outdoor recreation. The second use of the LWCF fund is for the development of new facilities and renovation of existing facilities. For example, if you have a park that is 20 to 30 years old and you need to update some of the facilities to meet the current ADA accessible standards, LWCF can pay for that. If the park received an LWCF grant in the past, it can receive new grant funding to update or renovate the facilities that received the funding in the past. LWCF also pays for a combination of acquisition and development or renovation. For example, let's say you own or manage an existing park and you have an opportunity to acquire land adjacent to your existing park and you want to build a playground on that new land. LWCF can help you do that. Please be aware, all parks that receive LWCF funding must be maintained for public outdoor recreational use in perpetuity or forever. These are just a few photographs of some of the projects that LWCF has funded. The purpose of this slide is to show you the diversity of the projects funded through this program. As you can see, there is a skate park, a small playground, a restroom, a splash pad, a trail, and a picnic shelter. Here are some more photos. These include a fishing dock, tennis or pickleball courts, campgrounds, tracks, and a universal playground. So take a look at the pages 2 through 4 of the grant application to see if you have a project that is eligible for funding. Here is a list of few things that are not eligible for funding. A more complete list can be found on page 4 through 5 or Adobe page 27 through 28 of the application guide. Support facilities that contribute to indoor activities such as meeting rooms, restaurants, luxury cabins, furnishing, food preparation equipment, and kitchens. Indoor facilities for public recreation such as recreation centers and indoor pools. Areas and facilities designated primary for semi-professional and professional arts or athletics. Restoration and preservation of historic structures. Community gardens that are planned as commercial enterprises. Boating equipment such as buoys, ropes, life jackets, and boats. And informational materials such as brochures and leaflets. Before you fill out an application, please look to make sure that you have an eligible project. So how do you apply? The process for applying is fairly simple, but if you feel overwhelmed as you start filling out the paperwork, please call us and we are here to help you. The grant management section information is listed here on the screen, including a link to the LWCF website where you will be able to find the recordings of the workshops after September 10th. Plus, you can find the application and the open project selection process. The first step is to go to that website and download the 2025 grant application form and the Open Project Selection Process, or OPSP packet. That is the directions for filling out the application. Fill out the application form and save it, print it, and mail it in. Final applications cannot be emailed. They must be mailed. And grant application packages must be postmarked or received by November 15th of 2024. We do recommend that you submit the final application before November 15th because any final application received before November 15th will be reviewed, and if items are missing or the application is not signed, we will give you until the end of the business day on November 15th to submit the signed application or any missing supporting documents. If the application is received on November 15th or after, the application is accepted as is. No corrections or additional information will be accepted. We are offering 4 separate workshops that will go through each question of the application. These are not mandatory workshops, but they are there to help you when filling out the application. If you have any concerns about your application, say, for example, you want someone to review your scope of work to make sure the activities are eligible, feel free to submit a draft copy of your application to us before October 23rd. It doesn't have to be the whole packet. It can be just the application, and we will give you suggestions on how to improve it. If you are asking for a courtesy review, we do accept these by email. Send those to mspgrants@dnr.mo.gov email address that you see there on the screen. Our firewalls only allow about 8 megabytes or less, so please be mindful of that when you're sending in your application for courtesy review. It is very helpful that if in the subject line you write request for LWCF courtesy review, and we are only doing 1 courtesy review per application. Currently, I'm the only person who will be doing the courtesy reviews, so I recommend that you get them in early because I do review them in the order I receive them. If you wait until the last day to turn in the application for review, it could take me up to 2 weeks to get them reviewed, and then you will only have a few days to make the changes and submit the final application by November 15th. After all the applications have been received, the application packets are sent to the LWCF Internal Advisory Board for scoring. This is a board made up of park and recreational professionals. They will look at your application individually and score it based on the criteria listed on the score sheet at the end of the OPSP packet. The grant application guide explains how many points are allotted for each section. After scoring all the application, the board comes together as a group in early January for the norming process, where they discuss the individual merits of the applications. They may adjust their scores accordingly to a strength or weakness identified by another member of the group that they may have overlooked. At the end of the meeting, they submit a list of projects they recommend for funding. The grants management section will then submit that list to our division director for his preliminary approval. Once we get his approval, we will contact the applicants of the projects that have been preliminarily selected and schedule a pre-award site inspection to verify that everything in the application as it was described. We will also conduct our risk assessment at that time to evaluate your capacity to comply with the requirements of the grant. Us contacting you to schedule a pre-approval site inspection and risk assessment in late or early February is your clue that you have made it into round 2 of the application process. Once we complete those pre-approval site inspections and risk assessments, we put together a list of those projects recommended for funding to send to our division and departmental directors for approval. After the projects have been approved by the department, we will prepare draft applications for the National Park Service that must be submitted usually by mid-March to early April. All applicants will then be notified of the results of the application review process by the end of June. Projects that are approved by the National Park Service will be uploaded into Grant Solutions when NPS opens a grant round. Usually this is sometime between December and April. Based off the past 2 years, the notices of award and project agreements will be sent to applicants in 2026, sometime between May and September. After we have received the federal award from the National Park Service, we will then host a mandatory grant administrative workshop where we will discuss the oversight and management of the project as well as long-term stewardship requirements. Applications will then have 2 years to complete the grant award from the date that you receive the, your federal award. One thing that is important to remember is that you can't start any type of development activities such as clearing the area of trees or removing old equipment or grading the area in preparation of the project or acquire any project until you have a signed agreement with the Department of Natural Resources. Doing any type of clearing, demoing, or grading ahead of the award will negate the environmental review process that the National Park Service must complete, and the project will be ineligible for funding. Generally, any costs incurred before a financial assistance agreement has been signed are not eligible. The only exception to this rule are the pre-award planning costs, which can represent up to 10% of the total project budget. The LWCF grant will reimburse for some pre-award planning costs such as design work, environmental review, and the cultural resource survey. However, if you intend to do this, I would contact our office to discuss what costs you are requesting for reimbursement and make sure that they are eligible. All pre-award planning costs have to be explicitly detailed in your application in order to be claimed as an expenditure. We also want you to consider some specific regulations when you are planning your application and your scope of work and budget for this project. And they are the Americans with Disability Act, or ADA. You will need to make sure that you have accessible parking and routes within your park that connect to all funded facilities. The Build America, Buy America Act is also going to be discussed in the next slide, and the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policy and Act will be discussed during the workshop on Wednesday afternoon for real property acquisition. So the Build America, Buy American Act is a requirement that the National Park Service has added to the federal award, and I wanted to let you know that we have new guidance about which projects need to meet Build America, Buy America Act, or BABA. This new guidance came out after we had printed the OPSP and the application. So what I'm going to tell you here today may contradict what you see in the OPSP, but the information I am giving during this workshop is the accurate information. So as required by section 70914 of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Job Act, which is Public Law 117 through 58, on or after May 14, 2022, none of the funds under a federal award that are part of a federal financial assistance program for infrastructure may be obligated for a product unless all the iron and steel products, including the coatings, are made in America. All manufactured products used in the project are produced in America and construction materials used in the product are produced in the U.S., unless they are subject to an approved waiver. The definition of infrastructure per the law includes, at a minimum, the structure, facilities, and equipment for, in the United States, roads, highway, bridges, public transportation, dams, ports, harbors, or other maritime facilities, intercity passenger and freight railroads, freight and intermodule facilities, airports, water systems, including drinking water and wastewater systems, electrical transmission facilities and systems, utilities, broadband infrastructure, and buildings and real property. Infrastructure includes facilities that generate, transport, and distribute energy. In February of 2024, Missouri State Park sent a waiver request to the National Park Service for a splash pad. The National Park Service determined that the project did not fund any of the enumerated categories of infrastructure within the scope of the Buy America Act, and a waiver was not needed. In keeping with the determination of the National Park Service, Missouri State Parks considers the following facilities and amenities to fall outside the definition of infrastructure as defined by the Buy America Act. This includes, but is not limited to, playgrounds, splash pads, splash gardens, swimming pools, swimming beaches, ball fields, sports courts, dog parks, running tracks, pavilions, and shelters, community gardens, restrooms, parking lots, and accessible routes. Short, utility water lines and sewer lines to connect facilities and amenities to main utility lines are also excluded from requiring BABA certification. If your project includes major infrastructure such as primary park roads, main utility lines, and large drinking water and wastewater systems, then these components will most likely meet the definition of infrastructure and will need to meet the requirements of the Build America Buy America Act. If you're unsure if your project needs to meet BABA, please give us a call. Hopefully, everyone was able to download the application in the OPSP, which is the application directions. If not, you can download the forms from the Land and Water Conservation Fund website. See the links that are circled here in the image, and that is what you need to download. We do recommend that you use Adobe for downloading and completing the application. In the past, we have been contacted by individuals who have issues with the form when they use other programs. So please use Adobe. The free version of Adobe works for filling out the application. This application looks similar to the last year application, but there are a couple of changes to it. So please make sure that you are filling out the 2025 LWCF application. Make sure that you work on the environmental review process early, because some of the processes can take 30 days to get replies back from other agencies. And a complete application, including all environmental review reports and maps, need to be mailed to us must be mailed or postmarked by November 15th, 2024. Once again this year, we are hosting a series of 4 workshops that will break the application down by section. Each workshop should last between 1 to 1.5 hours. You can decide which workshops to attend, and a copy of all the workshops will be posted online, hopefully by September 10th. The first workshop will be tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., which is the scope of work and budget workshop, and will cover the following questions on the application. It will cover project development and scope of work questions 54 through 59, project need questions 60 and 61, partnership question, which is 67, budget and budget detail questions 68 through 75. Tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m., will be the workshop for acquisition for real property. This workshop is for anyone that will be acquiring land by purchase or donation and will cover questions 35 through 53 of the application. We will also be covering the uniform appraisal standards for federal land acquisition at that workshop. On Thursday at 9 a.m. will be the workshop for project development and the LWCF boundary map. This workshop will cover project location questions 12 through 28, project management and stewardship questions 29 through 33, and project planning questions 62 through 66. There will also be examples of different LWCF boundary maps. Our last workshop will be Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. and we'll be covering the environmental review section of the application. This workshop will cover questions 76 through 85 and will show you the maps and reports needed to complete this section. You can register for all these workshops at the same place that you registered for this workshop on the LWCF Grant Workshop page. Now, I just want to cover the first and last pages of the application. The first section of the application, questions 1 through 8, asks you to provide general information about the parties included in the application process. The first 2 questions ask you to provide information about you as an organization. This should be filled out based on the entity that is applying for the funds. Please use a mailing address so that when I mail out letters, you will receive them. Note that we no longer accept the DUNS number and you will need to provide your 12-character alphanumeric ID from sam.gov. If you do not have this ID number, you will need to register with sam.gov to receive one. This process can take up to a month, so please register with sam.gov early. Question 3 asks about the application preparer. This is the person who is preparing the application. It does not have to be someone from your agency. So for example, it could be the Regional Planning Commission that you are working with or a grant writer that you have hired. If we have questions about the application packet or the application itself, we will contact this person. This is also the person that will receive information after the courtesy review, if one is requested. Question 4 asks you to provide the project manager for the project. This is the individual that will be working with us once the project is funded. They are the person who is overseeing the project and responsible for the expenditures and reimbursements once you have been awarded a grant. This is also the person that will be required to attend the mandatory grant administrative workshop. Question 5 through 8 asks about your federal and state representatives and Regional Planning Commission. Question 5 asks for the U.S. House of Representative member. Question 6 asks for the Missouri House Representative member. And number 7 asks for the Missouri State Senate member. These are people who will be notified if a grant application is awarded. Question 9 through 11 asks you to provide information about your organization's background and prior performance with the Department of Natural Resources as a whole. This section is worth 10 points. Pursuant to 2 CFR 200, we are required to conduct a risk assessment of all applicants to ensure that we are being good stewards of taxpayer dollars and that we are only awarding grants to entities that have the capacity to manage the project. The answers given in this section provide some information about your organization. If you are selected to move into round 2, you will be asked to provide additional information to complete the risk assessment process, such as a copy of your most recent audit, accounting policies, and procedures. Make sure to answer these questions based on the organizations listed in question 1. So, for example, if the City of Missouriville Park and Rec Department is the applicant, the information in this section should reflect the department as opposed to the city as a whole, or vice versa. In question 11, please note that we are asking you to provide performance history information for grants received by DNR as a whole and not just the LWCF program. Only talk about grants from the last 5 years. Make sure to provide accurate information so that we can verify this with the other project managers. Now, the last page of the application, we have the supporting document checklist. The supporting document checklist is provided on the application as an aid to project sponsors and should be completed before submitting the application packet. The supporting documents are required documentation to support your application and must be included with your application packet. For a detailed summary of each required item on this checklist, go to the OPSP Appendix B, the Grant Application Guide on pages 10 through 12, or in Adobe page 33 through 35. When you are reading the OPSP, you will notice that some of the words are highlighted purple. That indicates that a supporting document is needed for this question. In order for your application to be considered complete, you need to provide all the information listed in this checklist unless it says if applicable, and in which case it is up to you to determine if this applies to you. For example, the school community agreement is a requirement for schools that are applying, so they must provide that, but a city could say it's not applicable. The directions also include template language for many of the items on the checklist. Example, the Missouri State E-Verify is included on page 14 through 17 or Adobe page 37 through 40. You will need to fill this out and return this with your application packet. There are also templates for the resolution, financial assurance letter, school community agreement, and letters to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Remember that incomplete or handwritten applications will not be scored. The certification of responsible person is the signature section. A responsible official of the sponsor's agency, this is the individual that is named in the resolution, must sign and date this section to complete the application, or the application will not be scored. Examples of responsible officials include mayors, city managers or administrators, park and recreation department directors, and financial officers. For public schools applying for funding, the superintendent must be the responsible official and the resolution must be passed by the school board. The responsible officer does not need to be the contact listed on the application, but does need to read the application and have an understanding of the requirements of administering the grant should one be awarded. The responsible officer cannot be an independent grant writer who is not affiliated with the agency. Unsigned or incomplete applications will not be eligible for scoring. Please remember that the final applications are due by November 15th, 2024. And on this screen, you will see my contact information. And remember that I am here to help you if you guys have any questions in regards to this application.